Good morning, everybody. Happy to see you again. I'm Philippe Dumas, the Secretary of EJEC and the coordinator of the project Geo-Nv. Maybe you're familiar with that. We have started already 2 weeks ago a series of technical workshops about geothermal, environmental impact, risk, and incidents in order to remove the concerns about this topic. And today, again, we have a fantastic panelist. We will start in 2 to 3 minutes. We have more than 200 people registered. So you understand that the time that everybody is connecting, we wait 2 minutes. So see you in 2 minutes. And here I'm back. So thank you again, all of you, for connecting to this webinar. So I will start with a short introduction. We're already 110 people attending this meeting, but some more are connecting. I say we have 200 registrations, so hope it will soon be all of them. So thank you again for participating to this event. As I said, today we will treat the topic about seismic risk and with deep geothermal project tackle with that. We know it's quite a sensitive topic. It can create some fear, so it's fantastic to have such a panelist today that will answer all your concerns, because Geo-Nv is about that, is really answer the concern you may have. So just move the slide. The topic today is about seismicity. We have already treated last week air quality and the week before regulations. Next week, we have 2 webinars, not only on Tuesday, but also on Thursday. The first one on social engagement and the second one on water quality. We will come on the 23rd with a high-level policy event on just transition and how geothermal could be a solution. And we will come back with you after a break for Easter on 13th of April about life cycle assessment approach and sustainable finance. Today, I just start with a short introduction about Geo-Nv, but I see many of you were already connected last week and 2 weeks ago. We see new face, I would say new face, although we are not able to see you today. It's a pity we cannot have that in a physical event, but new name, I would say, in the list of attendees. I will, after again, I would say, give the floor to Adele, because she was the key author of recommendations for Geo-Nv, and here it will be a recommendation to mitigate potential seismic risk. Following that, we have the same format than the previous edition. We start with the first session with a national overview, and we come back after with a roundtable discussion, notably how can we establish a European code for assessing, monitoring, and handling this seismicity. we will end, and we try to give you much more time than usually about question and answers with audience. So we see also here the question you may ask. So just to repeat, you have three possibilities. You can use the chat, you can raise your question in the question section, or you can also raise your hand and we will give you a floor for a short oral comment. The national overview will see presentation from the case study in Flanders, from Ben Lannen, from Vito, in France, from Vincent Morer, from ES Geothermal, and from Iceland, from either Sigurður Kristjánsdóttir. The roundtable will see these presenters plus more experts, Andrea Morelli from INGV in Italy, Ludger Küpperkok from IM Energy in Germany. Mr. Yutun from Turkey is not sure to be with us. We try still to have you confirm joining us. Let's see if he's able to join. We have Mr. Jean Spielbuhl from EOST in France and Ryan Lowe from Geothermal Engineering Limited in UK. About Geo-Nv, I'm really short because it's really important today to dedicate more time about recommendation and discussion. Just if you want to know all information regarding Geo-Nv, connect to the project website. You could see details about the project, about the news, the events we organize, all the publication, and two important web platforms. One, if you want to develop a simplified life cycle assessment, you can use the online tool we have, and also an environmental database to give you more technical information. With that, I conclude my short introduction, and it's my pleasure to give now the floor to Adele Manzella to report the recommendation from the Geo-Nv project. I wish you a good event and like a traveling into the earth of the earth, and to see how we can handle this seismicity. So Adele, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippe. I hope you see my screen. Yes. Okay, so welcome also from my side to this webinar, to this workshop. I will go in more detail about the recommendation for ensuring seismicity control. Before that, just a brief overview of the frame of our work. This activity is part of a work package of the project that has been dedicated to map and analyze the current status of regulation related to environmental aspects of geothermal development. And the goal is to develop recommendations for improved regulatory practices, but also sharing of information. So not only regulation, but also guidelines and best practices to be shared among European countries. In particular, those countries participating in the project that are those in red in the map that you see. And another part, the main part of this work package is also to engage with the decision makers and other stakeholders. And this is what we are doing today. The recommendation, as I said, has been a part of this mapping and analysis of the regulation. So a first part of the activity has been the mapping, which produce a deliverable on decision-making process mapping, deliverable 4.1, which was then this collection of information was analyzed and brought to two main deliverables, one at the European level, so recommendation at the European level, and another one which was published at the beginning of this year on the compilation of recommendation. And what we are seeing today is a part of that. All these documents are available on the website of the project at this link. And what we are doing today is the actions, which is a stakeholder engagement. So altogether, we will check what are these recommendations, and let's see how to implement and improve them in the present and also especially in the future. So as already was said by Philippe, there are a number of topics that we want to discuss with stakeholders. Those are, some of them are technical topics. Seismicity is one of what we call technical topics, and this is what we are discussing today. And other topics have been also in joining. Some of them are going to be, or have been, or are going to be presented in the dates that you see here. One important thing that I want to say is also that all these topics, after this cycle of webinars and workshops, will produce a policy brief. And they will be published on the Geo-Nv website, but they will be also translated in many languages to be ready to use the document to bring it also to decision makers and to the public. So going to the topic of today, seismicity, the main challenge is improve information and harmonize seismicity control, because looking at the regulation, or more essentially on the guidelines, because this topic is not regulated, but is essentially organized as a set of guidelines which differ from country to country. And the main differences we have read are related to seismic data monitoring design, the thresholds that are used for action to mitigate risk, the control system that are used, and the availability of monitoring data. So after also stakeholder engagement at the national level, because this is the third policy workshop, the third cycle of policy workshop that we are doing, the other two have been based at the national level. This is the first one we are doing at European level. We provided a list of recommendations for this topic. We want to define some common guideline at the European level, but this is not an easy task. This is not something that we could do embedded in the Geo-Nv project, because it's a huge task for many stakeholders to provide. So we think that the main recommendation for this topic is, first of all, provide a comprehensive description of the status of seismicity, because we notice that the information on this is lacking, is very fragmented. And so we think that it would be very important to define a document listing geothermal plants, also the duration of the operation, and the lack or occurrence, but mostly the lack of seismic events at a level that is that we can consider anomalous, so felt events or damaging events, clarifying how much the operation of geothermal plants didn't involve seismic activity, and in case they did, why and how. Establish another main recommendation, and the main one is to establish a European code of best practice for seismicity monitoring and control. And this is a main action to be done. But we also think that these also required an harmonization of guidelines among sectors, because this issue doesn't involve only geothermal development, but is common to also to other sectors, oil and gas, waste disposal, mining, and so on. And an harmonized code should be available to control this issue when it happens. Since we were not we didn't have the strength to do this code, because, as I said, it's a huge task. At least we could, in the discussion with among us and with national stakeholders, we already listed a series of topics and action that the code should consider. For all the projects, we think that it is important to conduct a seismic hazard analysis and to adapt good practices for fluid injection and reinjection. We list a number of important action to be taken and to be defined as a good overall good practices. These should be there in the guidelines for any geothermal development. But in case there is a risk of seismic events, and for this risk, a threshold should be defined in the code that we envision. The situation needs to be further assessed. So in case of a certain level of seismic risk, there is a list of action to be taken, define seismic velocity model for the project and the layout, so design the monitoring, conduct seismic baseline, because it is important to know the natural background before the operation, preliminary predictive modeling with available data, define contingency plans, and open access to the monitoring data, because we think that also data sharing and transparency of data, monitoring data, is very important, is very strongly advised. When the wells are available, or once the wells are available, if not before the development of the main plant, it will be important to update a seismic velocity model, the predictive modeling, and conduct a stress strain analysis. Moreover, set up a control system, for example, traffic light system or other systems that the research and innovation will develop with time. Adapt preliminary threshold for further actions, and evaluate the seismic activity at given points in time. These very quickly are our recommendation. You can find them in the document that I mentioned, the deliverable 4.2 on recommendation. This is one of the topics that we described. What I want also to say that because this question was raised many times in the previous webinar, there will be all we are doing today is recorded, and the recording as well as all the presentation of today will be available on the website. And now we start with session 1. Just before doing that, so before the presentation of the national cases, I want to inform the audience that we prepared a survey for them to answer with this list of questions. Do you perceive seismicity as a main risk? How satisfied are you with the content of the Geo-Nv recommendation? That will be also discussed in the national cases that we will see today. Do you agree that the code of good practices should be harmonized among sectors? What kind of stakeholders should be involved in defining the code? And can you suggest practices and documents of reference for the definition? All these answer will be anonymous. So the answer to this questionnaire will be anonymous and will be used for further reinforcing the proposal that we are doing in this project. And with this, I finished, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Adele, for this really precise recommendation, and I hope it will help later the panelists to discuss. Now we come to the first session with a country overview, and we give the floor to Ben from Vito for the Flemish case. So Ben, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I will give a short overview of the Baltimore geothermal project and the aspect seismicity that is related to it. As an example of the situation in Flanders, Belgium. So the Baltimore geothermal project, it started about 10 years ago as an exploration project to see whether there is a deep geothermal potential in the northern part of Belgium in the Campine area. And the target for the project is the lower Carboniferous limestone group at a large depth of 3 kilometers or more, in order to see whether it can serve as a geothermal resource for both high temperature heat production, but also for combined heat and power. The ambition when we started the project was to evaluate both the technical and the economical viability of such projects in Flanders. The current state of the project, we drilled 3 wells and reached the lower Carboniferous reservoir at a depth between 3,200 and 3,800 meters. The real reservoir section seems to be in the uppermost 400 meters of the limestone. It's a fractured limestone reservoir with reservoir temperatures in the range of about 140 degrees C. And production temperatures, depending on flow rate, somewhere between 120 and 125 degrees C. We are able to produce from the well in the range of 70 to 150 cubic meters per hour. And then depending on the heat demand, we can go up to about 10 megawatt thermal output. The plant has been connected to an existing district heating grid operated at high temperatures. And we also installed a prototype of a flexible organic Rankine cycle just to see how power production could be integrated in such a district heating scheme. Now, looking at the project itself, as I said, it started in 2010, but actual drilling was done in the period 2016-2018 with testing of the wells. During this test phase, we noticed that from an existing seismometer network that there was seismic activity related to the reinjection of the geothermal brine. Something which I will discuss further later on. Then there was a test phase in going from the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, with the ambition to start up production in the second quarter of 2019. So we started up production in a number of steps, showing at least that technically the plant was operating. However, on the 23rd of June in 2019, we had a felt earthquake, about 2.1 on the Richter scale, which led to a suspension of the operations and evaluation, and then an evaluation of the seismic activity and the relation with the geothermal operations, which is still ongoing today. As said, we had this sensible earthquake on the 23rd of June 2019. It was felt in a large part of the municipalities of Dessel and Mol, with an intensity on the Mercalli scale between 2 and 3. Based on the evaluation of this event and a series of smaller events that preceded it, and that was already said, already started also during the injection testing in 2018. We looked at the installations, and this led to adaptations of the installations, both with respect to operability, in order to avoid abrupt shutdown of the installations in case something goes wrong, for example, on the electricity grid. We took some measures to lower the injection pressure, and also to have a more controlled pressure evolution in case the installation has to start up or shut down in an unforeseen way. And then we also installed a new ESP, which allows us to operate at very low flow rates, and that's mainly for testing purposes. Because when doing the evaluation of the seismic events, it also became clear that there is still a lot of unknowns about the triggering mechanisms and the way the seismicity evolves during operations. And that's why, together with Ineris, we designed a new test plan specifically aiming at understanding the relationship between the operations and the seismicity at this specific location, in order to come up with the question, okay, is there a viable operational window for geothermal heat production from these limestones in the vicinity of Mol? Now, that's a research program we are starting up now, and it involves, but that part is more or less finished, the extension of the seismometer network around the plant, adaptation of the traffic light system that was in place when we started the operations, and then a number of steps to model the seismic activity, and also to better calibrate these models to come up with more reliable predictive modeling of seismic activity of the limestone. Now, the legal basis for the work we are doing on induced seismicity comes from the Flemish decree on the deep subsurface, which also includes a number of articles related to ground movements, and ground movement also includes seismicity. And the decree says that the holder of an exploration or an exploitation license has to take all measures that can be reasonably expected from him to be taken in order to monitor, but also to avoid any damage due to ground movement. In case something would happen, there is the obligation of the license holder to compensate for any damage that may occur. And then, although there is no strict regulation that says, okay, this or this has to be done, there is the possibility that the competent authority imposes certain measures that has to be taken by the operator in order to monitor and to control the ground movements. Now, looking at Balmat, we indeed have some special conditions imposed in our environmental permit related to informing a group of stakeholders about the measures and the observations related to ground movement. And we also did an impact assessment that allowed our insurance company to come up with an insurance for damage that might occur due to induced earthquakes related to geothermal operations. For the rest, we started a monitoring program. It started already during drilling and testing of the wells using an existing network in the area, a network that was installed by NIRAS and operated by Royal Observatory of Belgium, and that detected the events during injection testing. And that information was important to redesign or to design a first extended network consisting of 7 seismometers to monitor and control once we would go in operation. And that network was in operation in November 2018, so before we started the actual testing of the installations. Over the last months, we have been extending this network in order to come to a higher magnitude or lower magnitude of completeness, and to be able to detect and to localize even smaller seismic events. The network now consists of 13 seismometers, and we are next week installing a 14 seismometer in one of the deep wells at the depth of 2 kilometers, completing then the network before we start up the tests that I discussed earlier. Now the monitoring is or the network is delivering continuous measurements that are linked to a traffic light system. A traffic light system that was first designed based on what we learned from the observations during the injection testing, but that has been redefined based on the evaluation of last year. And that will be redefined over and over again during the upcoming production tests to see what the relationship between seismic activity of the area and the geothermal production at Balmat is. Now, this slide gives you an overview of the seismometers. So initially, we just had to do wide ones of the existing network. Then we installed the blue squares, which have been in operation since November, and now we are we have installed most of the orange ones and still having to install the one in the deep well to complete the network. As I said, it's linked to a traffic light system that is currently based on 4 parameters, mainly magnitude, location, so the epicenter of the induced earthquakes, the number of earthquakes per time unit or per unit of time, and then ground movements looking both at velocity and acceleration. And it has three threshold levels. As long as we are in the green window, we continue operations as foreseen. Orange means adaptation of the operations, basically lowering flow rate, and then a controlled way of reducing the pressure in the injection well. And then the red light, which means stopping operations, and that's what happened on the 23rd of June 2019, leading then to either a real stop of the operations or suspension of the operations for further evaluation to see whether restart is possible or not. The data from the seismic network can be consulted in quasi-real time through the project website. The monitoring data is also transferred to the Royal Observatory and to other parties for research. And it can also be made available to everybody who wants to use it for any research purposes. And we welcome the idea to establish this European code and based on best practices, especially because in our specific case, it definitely would have helped to define the seismic monitoring and control system of the Baltimore plant. Okay, that's my part of the presentation. So I will give back the floor to Philippe.
Thank you, Ben, for this really detailed presentation. I just have a short question that maybe can be answered immediately by you. It's regarding the frequency content for BALMAT.
About the?
Do you have some frequency content? Frequency.
Some I don't really
maybe
get.
We can answer. If you wish, we can answer that with a written email because not all answer can be done orally. Now I'm giving the floor to Vincent Moret from AS Geothermal to present the case of France.
Hi everybody. I hope you can see me. Sorry. Okay, so my name is Vincent Moret. I'm working at AS Geothermal. AS Geothermal is in charge of the exploitation of two geothermal plants in the French side of the Upper Rhine Graben, the well-known Soul-sous-Forêt plant and the Rittershofen plant. So in my presentation, I will mainly talk about the French regulation framework, and at the end of the presentation I will do a little comparison with the German regulation framework. So currently in France it's very simple, there is no national regulation for induced seismicity. The only regulation framework concerns the Upper Rhine Graben for the drilling and the exploitation permits, and for the other geothermal plant in Paris Basin or Aquitaine Basin near the city of Bordeaux, the induced seismicity is not considered as a risk, so there is no regulation. The very first text we found concerning the regulation for the induced seismicity was for the Rittershofen drilling permit in 2019. At that time, permanent network installation or even densification was only based on operator decision. And we found the threshold in magnitude in 2.0 ml. And at that threshold, the operation should be stopped by the operator in case of anomalous, it's what cited in the text, event felt by the population. The very first big evolution of the regulation framework came in 2015 with the drilling permit for Vendenheim and Ilkirch project, which are two projects located close to the city of Strasbourg. This text is concerning the seismic and geodetic monitoring of geothermal plant. And in this text, it's mandatory to have 4 real-time short period stations in the vicinity of the plant. One real-time multi-sensor station, which is composed of 1 accelerometer and 1 broadband sensor. And the data of this multi-sensor station should be sent to the National Seismic Observatory, so it's public data. One GNSS antenna for geodetic monitoring and 1 corner coin for interferometry measurement should be installed on the drilling platform. And the seismic monitoring must be operational 6 months before any operation to have a state-of-the-art of the natural seismicity before the drilling. All the network must be in real time on operation during the whole life of the project. At that time, there were two thresholds based on magnitude. The first one at 1.5 ml define a threshold above which the seismicity should be continuously monitored by a seismologist. On a second threshold at 2.0, where all the facilities should be stopped. To be noticed that in the text there is also a constraint concerning the injection pressure, which is limited to 100 bar. The second evolution of the regulation framework came with the Sulz and Rittersofen exploitation permit in 2016. The main change was concerning the threshold. They are now based on PGV, peak ground velocity, and not in magnitude anymore. Of course, all the rules I speak about before are still valid. And now there is a threshold based on PGV. So the first threshold is a threshold of vigilance. If the PGV of at least two stations goes above 0.5 millimeter per second, in that case, the operator must continually monitor the evolution of the seismicity. The second threshold is a threshold of increased vigilance. So if PGV of two stations goes above 1 millimeter per second, then the operator will take the necessary measure to return below the previous threshold. And on that threshold, all the seismic data of the last 7 days must be provided to the National Seismic Observatory. On the last threshold is called the threshold of progressive and obligatory stop of the plant. If the PGV of two stations goes above 1.5 millimeter per second, then the operator must trigger the progressive shutdown of the facilities. And again, like the previous threshold, all the seismic data of the last 7 days should be provided to the National Seismic Observatory. This is an internal procedure we set up for the exploitation of the Rittersofen and the Sulz plant. It is based on the PGV level. So PGV level zero correspond to the normal case. The PGV level 1 correspond to the first threshold, level 2 to the second, and level 3 to the third. So once an event is is observed, the first situation is to evaluate the PGV level. If the PGV level is 1, then the seismicity is continuously monitored by a seismologist. And if there is no seismic event overpassing this level 1 within the next 6 hours, then the situation go back to normal. If the PGV level reaches the level 2, then an informative email is sent to the operator and to the owner of the geothermal plant, and the injection flow rate is reduced by 20 cubic meters per hour. And if another PGV level 2 seismic event is observed within the next 6 hours, then the injection flow rate is again reduced by 20 cubic meters per hour. And if there is no seismicity within the next 6 hours, then the situation goes back to normal. Then if an event reaches PGV level 3, an informative email is sent to the operator, to the owner of the plant, but also to the French mining authorities. Then an internal crisis unit is set up, and the shutdown of the facilities is launched. And then we have to wait for the authorization of the mining authority to start the plant again. Once we get this authorization, then we launch the procedure of restart of the plant, and we go back to the normal situation. You may have heard that in the year 2019, there was some felt seismicity in the northern part of Strasbourg. So my point in this slide is not to describe this seismicity, but to show you how it affects our project in Ilkirch, which is located 10 kilometers away from this seismic cluster. So the Ilkirch project started in 2015. So we installed the mandatory seismic network. And for the drilling operation, we densify this network with 10 temporary broadband surface stations. And So the first well was drilled in 2018 and ended in 2019. And we wanted to do some injection in the well after the drilling in June 2019. And we asked to the French mining authority, and it was authorized by the French mining authority to do the injection with the existing seismic network, that's to say with the densified seismic network. In November 2019, there was a felt event in the northern part of Strasbourg, and we wanted to do some other injection in September. So after this event in September 2020. So we asked again to the French mining authority if we can do this injection, and they asked us to densify again the network in order to be able to monitor the seismicity in a range of 5 kilometers around the well, and to be able to see if there is a migration of the seismicity to the north. So that's what we did. So we installed 7 temporary short base stations and 95 nodes in antennas. And we were happy with the injection. Everything went well. No event was felt by population, neither in 2019 and in 2020. But in December 2020, there was another event which was attributed to the Vendenheim plant in northern part of Strasbourg. And the French mining authorities decided to stop this geothermal project. And since then, all ongoing geothermal projects under exploitation and drilling in the French-Paris Basin are suspended, including the Ilkirch project. And we are handed to the conclusion of the mining authority. So we expect that a new framework will appear in the next year, and we expect more constraint, of course, for example, on the maximum injection pressure, on the depth of the wells, on the seismic monitoring, and the seismic assessment. However, I would like to remind you that for the moment, there was no felt seismicity induced by geothermal plants in the Intersofen or Sulz, which are in operation since 2016. And also no felt seismicity during the drilling and the testing at Ilkirch. No induced seismicity in the Paris Basin since the 70s, where there is 50 plants in operation. The same in Aquitaine Basin with 15 plants in operation, or at the geothermal plant of Bouillante in Guadeloupe, Iceland, which is in operation since the 80s. So just to sum up what is mandatory or not mandatory in French. So what is mandatory is a seismic hazard risk analysis, which is asked in the environmental impact assessment, but no guidelines are defined to handle clearly this analysis. What is mandatory in the French-Paris Basin is a seismic base threshold and evaluation of the seismic activity. What is not mandatory is a seismic velocity model. So this is still done by operators, but no validation by mining authority are required, and also no update are required after the first well. Also, predictive modeling, stress strain analysis, or the clear definition of traffic light system is not mandatory for the moment. Now, just to conclude and to see some differences between the regulatory framework. In Germany, the main difference is that they have to install 2 types of seismic monitoring seismic network. The first one is more dedicated to the monitoring of the buildings, and the second one more dedicated to the monitoring of the reservoir. They have to install their network 3 months before the start of the drilling, compared to 6 months in France. And what are public are the data coming from the velocimeter from the network dedicated to the monitoring of the buildings. Both in France and Germany, we use a PGV to monitor, to define the different threshold, except that in Germany, they have a 5 threshold, more higher threshold to stop the operation with a threshold at 10 millimeters per second, compared to France. For the reporting of the mining authority, it's quite the same in France and in Germany. So just to say that we are here in the same geological context in France and Germany, upper Rhine Graben, and sometimes the geothermal plants are located tens of kilometers away the one from the other, and the regulation are not the same. So it would be good to have a common regulation framework. And I thank you for your attention. And I give the floor back to Philippe.
Yes, thank you, Vincent. Yeah, really clear presentation, and all details have been provided. Thank you for the updates also regarding what happened in Alsace, and also reminding everybody that indeed sometimes it happened, but in general there were a lot of history in France without any induced seismicity. And now we will conclude the roundtable, giving the floor to Iceland, to Sigridur Kristjánsdóttir. Floor is yours.
Hey. So is it correct now?
Is it perfect?
Okay, good. So good morning, everyone. My name is Sigriður Kristjánsdóttir. I'm a seismologist at ISOR, or the Iceland Geosurvey, and I've worked here for way too long. ISOR is a government institution, but we work mainly in the geothermal industry. And as seismologists, we monitor geothermal fields in Iceland. So we are currently monitoring 6 high temperature geothermal fields. There are 3 up north. There's in Krafla, there's 4 up north. There's Krafla, Námafjall, Bjarnarflag, and Þeistareykir. Þeistareykir is the youngest one of these. And then we are also monitoring geothermal fields in the southwest, in Hengill, and that's Nesjavellir and Hellisheiði. So we have a very dense seismic networks around these sites. We used to monitor the Reykjanes power plant, which is out on the Reykjanes Peninsula, but they discontinued their monitoring in 2018. So we don't have a seismic network there anymore. And we also work with collaborators from Cambridge, from the Czech Academy of Sciences, and GFZ in Potsdam, when we're monitoring this seismicity out on the Reykjanes Peninsula, which has been doing a lot lately. There's a dike intrusion going on, and it's getting pretty close to the surface, about 1 kilometer from the surface. So all of the seismologists here at ISOR and at the Icelandic Meteorological Office and the university are quite excited these days watching the development. So in total, we have 96 permanent stations which are streaming data to ISOR in real time. We get 21 stations from the IMO, so we are working closely with them. And then we have 75 stations from us and collaborators. And as I told you, there are these 3 collaborators that we're working with in Reykjanes, but we're also working with ETH in Switzerland. We have a very dense network in the Hengill area within a European project called Co-Seismic. But I want to just jump straight into it. These are the regulations that we have in Iceland for induced seismicity. They are quite recent. So we have one regulation which is installed by the National Energy Authority, and then we have like a guideline which comes with the regulations to kind of clarify some of the points in the regulations. So the regulations started because of seismicity in Hengill in the Húsmúli injection site, and there's a little bit of self-promotion here. This is from my PhD project. So they started injecting in this site in Húsmúli, which is associated with the Hellisheiði power plant. And they started injecting, and just a few days later, a very intense seismic swarm started, which culminated in 2 magnitude 4 events that were clearly felt in the area. And this happened only about 3 years after a large event in the south of Iceland, which was a 6.8. So people were still a little rattled. And you see here on the lower right side of the screen, there's some Icelandic news about the seismicity, and people were not happy. And the operators at the Hellisheiði power plant, they were quite caught off guard. They didn't expect any seismicity to take place because they had been injecting in other places in the area with no hardly any seismicity connected with it, and it's quite uncommon in most places in Iceland to have seismicity connected with the injection. We of course have a lot of seismicity because there's lots of natural seismicity, but it's usually very small if there's any induced seismicity, and we cannot feel it. So following these big events in the southwest of Iceland, there was a panel that was formed, and they wrote these guidelines and the regulations that were installed a little later. And those are the regulations that all the power plants have to follow now. But most of the power plants have already been up and running for some years, or in some cases many decades, before the regulations were put in place. So how do the Icelandic regulations compare to the Geo-Nv recommendations? It's quite simple. It pretty much falls along the same lines as the Geo-Nv guidelines. There are some exceptions. What I saw from the French case study, it's a quite similar. So we have to do these preliminary assessments if the injection goes above a certain threshold, or if you are injecting into an active fault system, which is often the case in Icelandic geothermal power plants, because you want to inject into a fault system which is open and can take all of the fluid that you're injecting into the system. So the threshold is 0.001 G, which would be the you would have to do an assessment, and more research needs to be done if you expect to have these kind of events. And we have to do these preliminary assessments, or the power plant license holders must do these preliminary assessments, and we have done quite a few of those when they are changing or starting an injection. And in all cases that we have done, the results has been that there is no hazard for felt events. It is now required that all of the power plants do a contingency plan. So they have to make a list of, for example, who to contact and when, and what the plan is if there is an event that takes place. And it would have been good to have that plan in 2011 when they started to inject in Hellisheiði, because they first said that the injection was, the seismicity was not related to your operations in the power plant, but the people that were actually controlling the re-injection, they knew that it was connected. They could just feel it when they changed something, that the seismicity picked up almost immediately. So even within the company, they didn't seem to be talking together. And then there's the key point of monitoring, and most of the power plants that we have are doing some sort of monitoring, have installed a local network. HS Orka has decommissioned their local network, but we still have the regional network from the Icelandic Meteorological Office, which is quite sensitive to small events. So it should be quite good enough to use that network, although you lose, of course, a lot of information and detail if you don't have this local seismic network. So the main differences that I see with the recommendations from Geo-Nv is that we are not required to update the velocity model. We usually have a velocity model from the meteorological office. In some cases, we do local velocity models, but most of the time we use the regional velocity model, and there's no requirement to update it once operations have started. And we don't do any predictive modeling of the reservoir either. It's quite tricky in Iceland. We have been trying to do it within the co-seismic project, and it's very, very challenging because, like the Hengill area where we are trying to do the predictive modeling, is very complicated. We have very many wells and we have lots of faults, and it grows very, very fast, the size of the model. There is, of course, reservoir modeling that is done in any case, but to try to predict where we will have seismicity, or if we will have seismicity with changing production and injection, has not been done and is not required. So just a little overview of induced seismicity in Iceland. This is an example from Þeistareykir, which is the newest power plant up north, just north of Krafla. And we see this seismicity. It's the red dots here, this cluster of activity underneath Mount Bæjarfjall. And this is also the production area. You see the 3 wells in blue, green, and red. And these are very, very powerful wells and really good production. But the seismicity was there already before the operation started. So this is not induced seismicity. There's also a smaller cluster to the north west, and we have not been able to connect that to any operations in the area. We have some injection wells to the north of the production site, but they're quite shallow, only around 400 meters deep, and we don't see any seismicity related to those wells. And in Hellisheiði, which is in the Hengill area, we see some clustered seismicity. So we have this big cluster here. This is induced seismicity in the injection site in Húsmúli, where everything started in 2011. So we still have seismicity going on here. We also see in the south part of the area, we see another seismic cluster, which is related to production. So this seismicity here started when they started producing from this area. We see another smaller one to the west, which is also an injection site. So this is the original injection site, which is not producing as much seismicity as the Húsmúli injection site. So the Hellisheiði power plant is located here very close to the injection site. And to the north of the area, we have Nesjavellir, which is another power plant. We also see seismicity there. And I'm going to zoom into Nesjavellir in a moment. So we have all of these clusters, then we also have natural seismicity. So the smaller clusters here on the east side of the map, they are natural seismicity, and the same here to the northeast, that's probably also natural seismicity. And we can see, if we look at the depth of the seismicity, that there's clearly some updoming going on, which could indicate the change in the brittle ductile boundary. So if we zoom in here on Nesjavellir, and we see in the depth view, we can see the wells are here marked in blue with a black line. We see some seismicity located here, so these are probably related to the operations in the geothermal field. But then we have a deeper seismicity, which is probably not related to the production or the injection. So this is kind of the challenge that we have in Iceland. We have so much natural seismicity that it's difficult to discern which is natural and which is induced. So to bring it all together, we have the Icelandic regulations are quite similar to the Geo-Nv recommendations. There are some discrepancies, but in general, they're quite similar. We have a feeling that maybe the current regulations that we have in Iceland need to be reviewed a little bit. We know that the energy companies here, they some of them use a traffic light system, some of them do not. Some of them have been very diligent in, for example, informing stakeholders when they are going to change something, when they are starting injection or making some changes to injection. They send out a press release, but they don't, it's not clear if this is helpful or not, or if the stakeholders actually want to keep getting these press releases. And it's mainly they have sent out these notices when they are increasing or starting injection, but oftentimes the seismicity starts when they have a drop in injection. So, and that is not covered in the regulations. We would of course be thrilled to build a European code for watching induced seismicity, and I don't think we're inventing the wheel, and there's lots of previous works that has been done. The regulations in Iceland are based on work that had been done in the Geyser project. They're also built on rules by the Department of Energy in the United States. Within the co-seismic project that I've mentioned before, we are working on an advanced traffic light system, which would be the successor to the traffic light system. But in Iceland, I think we have quite special circumstances because we have such an active natural seismicity that trying to discern between the two is quite a challenge. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sigridur, for this clear panel. We have some questions for you, but maybe let's start the roundtable, and the question will be raised during this roundtable. So now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Fausto Battini, who will be the moderator of the second session with new panelists. So Fausto, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm trying to share my screen. Oh.
It's coming, it's coming.
No, it's the wrong one. Sorry.
Já, ég er bara á webinari.
But maybe while we are waiting for your screen, I just repeat to people. So please raise your question in the right-hand area, and we will use them later during the Q&A. So Fausto, floor is yours now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So good morning. Actually, which is the purpose to understand how to build a European code for assessing, monitoring, and entering the seismicity. As the previous speakers show, there are in geothermal areas. The geothermal areas are characterized by seismicity. The hydrothermal areas such as Italy, Iceland, Turkey, California, Japan are characterized by very low magnitude in general, with a magnitude less than two that are annually recorded. Sometimes seismic events are felt by population with magnitude higher than 2. However, in this area, the maximum magnitude recorded during the development of geothermal operation didn't exceed the maximum magnitude historically documented in this area. Some geothermal projects, mainly AGS, are located in very low moderated seismic area. And here, in some cases, a cause-effect relationship between geothermal operation and seismicity can be detected. This table is taken from the study on induced seismicity potential in energy technology, which is not only related to geothermal, but also to other industrial activity. And you can see here the maximum magnitude recorded in several geothermal field, geothermal projects around the world during the project development exploration. And as you can see, 100 felt of seismic event -1 are occurring, but only few are recorded with the magnitude higher than 2. More recently, according to MEGAR, a kind of relationship was found in order to understand what could be the maximum magnitude occurring in relation with the way to perform the fluid injection. In particular, in this graphics is shown that the injected volume versus magnitude, and you can see that in most of the geothermal projects, most of them are abandoned because they are representing experiments. Anyway, you can see that the maximum magnitude didn't exceed 4. Now, in conclusion, we have to say that no casualties in the population, neither destruction of houses or infrastructure occurred along many decades of geothermal project development and operation in Europe. Why this last sentence? Because now I'm going to introduce the discussion, and I would like that the panelists will answer 2-3 questions. The first is this one: does seismicity represent a substantial risk in geothermal project development and operation in your country? If yes, are there anywhere documented cases of induced seismicity occurred? And what is the lesson learned from the above case to avoid the seismic risk? So I think we can start with Mr. Morelli, and then I will ask all the panelists to give a quick answer. Let's say 2-3 minutes maximum. Please, Morelli.
Hello, if you can hear me. Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Fausto. Well, you already introduced this topic, but I would like to add a few words on the case of Italy to answer your question. Italy is somehow in a special case in the EU, somehow similar to the case of Iceland, because of course it is a country with seismic risk, seismic hazard that is widely spread essentially in all the territory. This of course makes it much more difficult to identify the induced origin of an earthquake. And actually sometimes we also see that in some sense the same concept of induced with respect to triggered with respect to natural seismicity lacks a clear definition, because in a critically stressed crust it may be difficult to identify the real culprit. In fact, in Italy, sometimes we can even talk about naturally induced or naturally triggered earthquakes, such as due to effects of precipitation. we are increasingly finding out this effect, the effect of water on microseismicity. So this is a different landscape with respect to an aseismic territory where some competent rock is fractured on purpose. In a tectonically active area, it is difficult to unambiguously define induced earthquakes. And this is the case of Italy, where while correlation of oil and gas activities have never been clearly related to seismicity, except for wastewater range action, if some seismic activity has indeed been related to geothermal activity in Tuscany. This relates mainly to increase in small magnitude events, generally less than magnitude 2, I think, but a relation with injected volumes has been established in a safe way. So, but this is a statistical link. So anyway, there are a few cases. These are very few cases where indeed some earthquakes have been associated with human activity for geothermal energy. I would like to point out 3 specific points that are relevant for Italy and maybe also for Iceland. We see that one of the requirements is to conduct a background seismic survey to define a seismic baseline. Now, it may happen, and in fact, it has happened in Italy, that an earthquake of magnitude 4.3 occurred during one of these surveys that, in fact, hindered the development of industrial activities. Now, when we are in a seismic country, we have to think about what to do if something like this happens. What would happen if the tectonic earthquake like this would occur when the industrial activities are already going on? Another point is that in some places, like in Tuscany, we have small neighboring concessions. So the question asks about how to regulate the joint use of data that are owned by different companies. This is of course important. An integrated approach in this case is necessary if we want to be efficient in dealing in monitoring seismic activity when we have many small concessions that are operated by different operators. A third point that I would like to point out is that citizens in Italy are worried about earthquakes because they are continuously exposed to seismic hazards. They know that they live in a country, in a territory with some significant seismic hazard. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that they are somehow more resilient with respect to earthquakes, or they are more tolerant with respect to earthquakes. Because it has been seen that they have different attitudes between a natural event and one induced by human activities. So it is requested by citizens, even in seismically active countries, to monitor the possible seismic effects of underground energy technologies.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Now I would like Luger Kuspekov, sorry for the pronunciation, give us his answer to the question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. You won't see me because I have I use Linux, and I think it's not compatible to this software here, but hopefully you hear me.
Yes, can I hear
okay, you? That's fine. Okay, well, first of all, to the question which you raised here, does seismicity represent a substantial risk in the geothermal project development? Well, it is a risk, but it is a handleable risk. There is no technique without a risk, and at that point, I would like to so to say, to destroy a narrative which somehow arose within the past few years. Induced seismicity is not a malfunction of the system. It's not malfunction. It is physics. It's a law of nature. It's like gravitation. because if you bring in fluids into the crust or even in consolidated sediments, you will get induced seismicity. That's the physics behind it, because you increase the pore pressure and you will get induced seismicity. But it is handleable, and with the traffic light system and a very good seismic monitoring, user the dense network, you're able to keep it somehow under control. And of course, there are well-documented cases of induced seismicity. I'm responsible for monitoring the Insheim reservoir in Germany, close to Landau, for about 8 years now. From the very beginning, I was also responsible for the Landau monitoring for 2 years. And definitely there is induced seismicity, and we know how it happens. And but it is handleable. I do not fully agree to McGarr, who correlates the injected volume to the seismicity, because at least from Insheim, we see no correlation to the injected volume, because we would have more seismic events, stronger seismic events, if McGarr would be right, and we do not see this. It is obviously that we see a short decrease of seismicity which is correlated with the decrease in seismicity of the quantity and the size of the earthquakes. I think we must distinguish between the several different systems, between the geological environment. We must, maybe McGarr is right if we investigate hot dry rock projects, the pure hot dry rock projects, which are usually settled in crystalline basement, where we have very stiff, very strong rocks, and usually no fluids. But Insheim, Landau, and also Rittershofen, these are systems which we call hot, wet, fractured rock. So there are natural fluids, there are natural fractures. So I think we have to distinguish in which tectonic and also in which geological surroundings your project will be settled.
Okay, thank you. I think we need more research to better understand the behavior of injection in a different geological setting. And I think that is one of the next steps. Now I will ask John Smith-Bull to give answer to the question, please.
Hello to everybody. So yeah, so to your question, I think the recent history in Strasbourg is a very clear answer to your question. Is there a substantial risk? The answer is yes. I would like to come back to the previous comments. The comments is about the definition of your substantial risk. First, I think it should be, in general, it should be balanced by the what are the benefits of this in front of this risk, and this is the balance that is important. Maybe not just the risk itself, because there is risk in any technology. So, and the second point I would like to emphasize also from the previous comments is the specificity of each site, and also the big difference between conventional deep geothermal energy, where there is no stimulation and no targeting of changing the permeability of the medium, and the one where there is a clear targeting of changing the permeability of the medium. Of course, the risk is very different in these two cases. But just to come back to the Strasbourg case, because you were asking about national experiences, I think the Strasbourg cases is very interesting, and it's now under expertise. But the preliminary results we have from this the analysis provides some important points for the discussion. The first one is the quality of the exploration, actually. So not so much related to the monitoring itself, but really to the starting point of the project. And in Strasbourg, as much as we go into the analysis of the project, we see that there are some problems with the explorations, with the knowledge of the reservoir, the knowledge of the natural circulations. And from that poor knowledge, it at the end led to some very high risk. So it's not just a matter of monitoring the seismicity. The risk evaluation is also about having a high quality exploration. And a big question is about who should be in charge of that and how much it should be shared between the academic community and the industry. And for that, I would like to comment on the Souls case, which was, and the Rittershofen one, which is a benefit from all the knowledge from the Souls case. It's a very strong link between the academic work and the industry that led to a very high level knowledge of the reservoir, and that reduced the risk actually very much. So this first message is about the quality of the exploration, which is extremely important. And also, as it was also said, the impact of the natural context. This knowledge is very important about the natural risk. And there is a big question, at least in France, is how to change the risk assessment to take into account human activity. And this is a difficult question. So, and a third aspect I would like to emphasize also is about data management. I think there is a clear need. It was mentioned during Andre's talk about data sharing, and it's also about this link between industry and academy. Data sharing is a way to link this. And for this, there are several initiatives. I would like to emphasize one of them in this discussion, which is the EPOS initiatives, especially the platform from Anthropogenic Hazard, which is now developing, and I would encourage the community to use it and develop it. There are many cases that are reported now, and it's not only the data that are reported, it's also tools to analyze, to do your own analysis. So it's a very interesting platform for that. And the data, it defines also what is data for this type of topics. It's really the mix between the seismological measurements and the industrial forcing, and the forcing term, which is very important. So a data set is completed when there is this link between the forcing term and the response of the system. And this is the data that we need. It's not just the data of the seismicity that we need, of course. So data management is important. And also possibly to come to the monitoring itself, something that Vincent Moret mentioned a little bit in his talk, because this was the result of the discussion we had at that time, is to widen the bandwidth of the monitoring. Up to now, most of the monitoring of reservoir is done from short period stations. So high frequency monitoring. I think the question from Philippe was about that. What was the frequency range of the monitoring? High frequency monitoring is the one that has been done up to now. Should we, and this is our suggestion, to broaden that frequency range, to go to a much lower frequency, like the INSTAR monitoring or the GPS, GNSS monitoring, or broadband monitoring, inclinometry. So to have a much more extended monitoring to get to go for this big step from just a large magnitude event monitoring to really the fine detail of the reservoir evolution over time. And to finish with
just excuse me, this is you are responding to the second question, but
okay.
First I would like to ask Ryan Lowe to reply to this question.
Okay, then I come back here. Okay.
Thank you. Ryan?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
And hopefully you should be able to see me too. Can you see me now? Yes, you can. So I mean, I'll try and respond to some of these actual questions. Your first one, whether it is a substantial risk to geothermal project development. So at the moment for the UK, I can't say that it is a substantial risk because there have been such few projects apart from ours that have caused induced seismicity. Whether it could become a substantial risk will depend entirely on how the public react both locally and nationally to these sorts of events. So the UK is a very seismically stable country, and probably most of you aren't aware that the shale gas industry in the UK was entirely stopped because of the national media coverage of induced seismicity. So there is total potential for induced seismicity to be a substantial risk to geothermal development. At the moment, it's not. Are there any well-documented cases? Yes, our project has caused a lot of induced seismicity over the last 8 months, from very small events through to the largest at a 1.9 magnitude at about 4.5 kilometers. In terms of lessons learned, a lot, okay? A lot in terms of not just management of induced seismicity, which is highly dependent on the geology, but also understanding how different communities perceive events. And this will be different in every location. Yeah, so we are governed under mining regulation, which actually has quite high limits of surface acceleration. And what we have found is we've greatly reduced our limits of what we would call our own traffic light system, our own internal acceptability of surface acceleration, and the perception of the locals, it's very, very low, the acceleration that they have detected and picked up on. So far lower than we would have thought when we started this project. Now that may be because of certain geological factors. You know, we've noticed that people pick up on seismicity if they happen to be along the big fault structure that we've targeted. But we've also noticed that in general, there are certain types of people that pick up on induced seismicity more than others. So it's really, I know we're talking about a European sort of guidelines and numbers that you can base a project development on, but it's often very, very specific. You know, very local issues come into play where people are very used to mine blasts because it's an old mining area and there are at least 2 quarry blasts a week. And it seems that quarry blasts are totally acceptable to the local community, even though the surface acceleration is far greater than the events we've caused. And yet there's more concern about the seismic events, even though they're much smaller than quarry blasts. So I think you have to, even though we could develop sort of European guidelines, which will be very useful in terms of a sort of an overarching structure, I think any developer is going to have to really look at the local issues and the geology involved, because the geology is very specific. You know, we cause no seismic events in our injection well, none. And the injection well is about 2.3 kilometers. And we cause hundreds of induced seismic events in our production well when we were effectively stimulating it, which is much deeper, which is about 5.2 kilometers. So a great deal of difference even between wells in the same geology. So that would be my sort of overall lesson of what we've learned so far is the guidelines are useful, but each project will be very specific.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move to the second question. Do you agree to propose a European geothermal code for seismicity control during geothermal project development? Which data and documents should be collected to share the best practices? Should the AGC be harmonized with the best practice adopted in industrial sectors such as oil and gas and waste disposal mining? I think Ian already responded a little bit to this question, but I would like to start again with Andrea Morelli and complete the round among the panelists. Please, then, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Shortly, I think that the European Code for Seismicity Control is not only a good idea, but it is absolutely necessary. In Italy, we do have recommendations for seismicity control. It is a document that includes guidelines and directions that has been produced following a recommendation by an international committee that was nominated after the earthquake sequence in the Emilia-Romagna region in 2012. This sequence was suspected to have been triggered by oil and gas activities in the region. Then this was discharged as an origin. However, these guidelines have been written by a committee that was nominated by the ministry involved with the mining safety, and it was issued by the ministry in 2014. These guidelines involve quasi-real-time monitoring of seismicity and ground deformation, and as a traffic light system. The guidelines have been put to test. The test actually developed quite slowly for a series of administrative difficulties. And we, at my institution, are involved in applying these guidelines in different situations, oil and gas and geothermal energy activities. After the test period, they should have been revised. And there is a committee of which I am part that is charged to update the guidelines after the test of 2 years. So this experience shows, in my opinion, the need to have clear guidelines that, however, can and should be revised after they have been put to work to correct some oversights and to improve in view of the scientific development. So again, to do this at the European level is particularly important. Although, as it has been mentioned, I totally agree that this code should absolutely consider very different situations of different territories that it would involve. Why this? Well, I think that a European code would be a way to for the control to be more authoritative and reliable. We need no improvisation on this. And the second point is that this would be a way to better deal with legal consequences on the monitoring. We as scientists are often worried about this because this is outside our expertise. Because this monitoring has an impact or may have an impact on one side on society and property, and on the other side on economy, industry. So decisions that follow from monitoring seismicity may have a strong impact, and the European Code should collect the best practices and give clear protocols and recommendations and be a good point on this field. Again, for the second sub question, I think that it should absolutely be harmonized with other sectors like oil and gas, because we are dealing with somehow similar activities in a way, but again with very well, considering the specificity of different activities and the different geological situations. Another point is that such a code will need to be kept up to date to follow scientific development.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Luger, please.
Yeah, okay. Well, I absolutely agree to come up with a harmonized European geothermal code for seismicity control. Furthermore, I would really why? Because I think this harmonization would really push the different operators to share information, to share knowledge, for avoiding to make the same mistakes twice or more often. This definitely happened, especially during stimulation operations, using really very, very high injection pressures to stimulate the reservoir. And we know that we have to handle the reservoir very, very carefully. And I think there have been done a lot of mistakes within a few years. The question, which data and documents should be collected? Well, that's difficult to say because the data are owned by the operators. So that must really be done by law. How and which data are open for the public. I'm not at all involved into oil and gas waste disposal, so I cannot say if we should orientate on these practices there. But yeah, to conclude, I absolutely agree, and it's really time to come up with a harmonized European-wide geothermal code for seismicity control. Absolutely.
Thank you, Luger. Jan, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, so I will also support, strongly support European code. To me, it's like a kind of a dream for the moment because it's so many cases, so many different cases, and so many specificities that it's maybe difficult to assess, but of course we should target that. I insist on the importance of having a good databases, good access to databases of all the case studies to really have to increase the richness of the experience about all those projects and have this code very well exposed towards all this data acquisition and those sets of data. And another concept I would like to possibly suggest, and I don't know if how it should evolve, is the involvement of the population in this code, and in the monitoring in general. And there are some initiatives in Strasbourg. We are trying to develop ones about citizen seismology, and it's very important for the uptake of the population and somehow in the relationship between the population and the operators. So how low-cost instruments massively distributed in urban context could impact the development of the project, both for providing data, and for us it was at the observatory in Strasbourg, it was important to have those data of those low-cost instruments to have a good monitoring, and also to see, and we have also collaboration with our social science colleague for understanding how the access to some data, to some knowledge from the population is changing the development of the project. So a code is something, an evolution of the relationship between the operators and the population through instrument and shared monitoring would be another strategy.
Okay, so thank you for your contribution. Ryan, it's your turn.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with the other panelists on this, in the sense that a European code would be useful, and I think there's two reasons in my mind why that could be useful from a development point of view. So one is when we approach funders, when other project developers approach funders, it would be very useful to have a standardized document that you could also use and present to potential investment funds so that they can understand induced seismicity and they can make a call on relative risks, because there is a perception, certainly amongst quite a few funds I speak to, that induced seismicity is a risk and a reputational risk to those funds if they back a certain type of project. So I think it would be very handy to be able to point them in the direction of an established code so that they can both understand induced seismicity and make a decision on potential risk before investing in a project. So that's one angle. The other angle is the local community and the local politicians, to be able to point them in the direction of an agreed document, so that instead of hearing about a project when we move through planning permission, instead of just searching the internet and typing geothermal induced seismicity or geothermal earthquakes, which will bring up a lot of projects that probably aren't relevant to some of the local areas we're dealing with, instead of sort of an immediate sort of installation of fear amongst the local community and amongst local politicians, if they were able to access a document readily online, that would help us when we start those discussions with both politicians and local people by saying, look, we are, as a developer, we are not making this up as we go along. You know, it's an established practice. Here are the documents you can point to and download, and to help inform the discussion, because some of the discussion locally, even though we have very high public acceptance, there are people that will go online and immediately be full of fear about what it is we are doing. So from my perspective, there's two angles to have this established code. So from a development point of view, we can point to it for funding, but also from community acceptance to help the dissemination of that knowledge, but also the perception that it is an established practice. You know, it does occur during these projects.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And now let's move to the final discussion items. How to address future activities for implementation of more effective method and best practice to prevent a seismic risk. Would it be worth to establish a consortium, including stakeholders of industry and the research sector, to define the research and development priorities? Could it be beneficial to have continuous exchange of experience among geothermal operators to adopt the best practice and engage with the general public? So, Andrea, I think you can start, and then we can continue with the others. Please.
Yes. Similarly to the question before, I think that also a consortium as a European initiative would indeed be very useful. Continuous exchange of experience among different actors is very important. We will definitely benefit from comparing different situations that we have at hand, different geology, different technologies, and different societies. And the exchange will be important, and we all will learn from this. I may point out two points related to this. The first is that it is important to create an environment with reciprocal trust. And for this, it is necessary that people will work together. We need operators to trust scientists involved in monitoring. In Italy, these two roles are clearly separated. And we need scientists involved in the monitoring to trust operators. They may happen more easily if these actors are all part of some community with continuous mutual exchange of expertise. The second point, I would emphasize that an endeavor like this involves three different actors: those representing industry, those representing research, and those representing citizens and society. This has been mentioned already. I would follow this because this is an important point. Social engagement is the subject of the following day at Geo-Nv. From the seismological point of view, I strongly support this pursuing this topic. I think that we should be open to administrators and citizens and give high importance to outreach and dissemination. I have had several experiences about such requests from citizens and society. They do want some expert advice and have many questions. And so I think that this is an important point.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Duger, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, well, I absolutely agree to Andrea, and I think it is very important what he first stated, that we have to establish an environment of trust. And therefore, I think we definitely need to take the population by the hand and really inform them what we are doing. And it is really puzzling sometimes. And here I come back to what Ryan stated before. We also have quarry blasts in the very vicinity of the geothermal power plants, and very often the measured peak ground velocities are much higher than the ones of the induced seismicity. But nevertheless, the people are more scared about induced seismicity and not about what happens to their buildings from the quarry blast. And they sometimes there is damage because sometimes the villages are very in the very vicinity of the quarry blast. So that means that the population is not fully informed about what we are doing and what is happening with induced seismicity. I'm only a scientist. I'm not a politician, and so I do not know the pros and cons of a consortium. But once again, it is very important to take the population, to take the citizens by the hand and inform them and to come up with a trustful environment.
Okay, thank you. Ian?
I fully agree with this about the importance of the social uptake and the social the population participation to the project. So I think there is two, as I mentioned before, there is two directions: either to create a sort of an expert group that will evaluate the project. Maybe it could be compared to the nuclear industry, where there is a national agency for assessing the risk and defining where to go or how to adjust the things. Or there is another way, is to really try to work on to include much more social science in the evolution of this. And this is what we have been trying to do in Strasbourg for some time. And one lesson I think in this discussion could be the following: is that we have it's clearly not just a matter of information. I think I understood from the previous discussion that it's one step, to provide information, but we clearly see that people actually have a very high knowledge. At least some of them have a very high knowledge of what is happening. Sometimes it's extremely high knowledge because they are becoming expert from access to the information online, and they are typically the most active ones in being pro or against the project. And so it's not just a matter of communication or information distribution. So this strategy is not correct, at least for our case. And it's much more a question of creating a space for sharing, for participations, and for having the involvement of all the stakeholders. And this is, I'm not sure if a pure consortium of experts will solve that solution in this way.
Thank you, John. Brian, what is your point of view?
So a couple of things here, particularly what Jean just picked up on. So where we were in Cornwall, those of you that know the project, we had a very extensive education and community engagement program. Okay, so we reached out to at least 10,000 local people through all of the local schools, through all open days at the site over a case of maybe 18 months. We also installed some, I'm sure most of you know this, Raspberry Shake seismometers, which are very cheap and very effective, and we put them in all of the local schools so that all of the kids would get very excited about seismicity, you know, start picking it up from across the world and become involved and not be scared of seismicity. But, you know, despite that huge outreach program, you do not reach everyone. You know, you cannot reach everyone. So there is a sort of slight mismatch in having a very big education program, which you know I'd recommend to everyone. But there will always be people that you cannot win over, and I think you must accept that as a developer, that there will be plenty of people that will always complain about what it is you are doing. But certainly we found one of the best ways to engage the adults was to educate the children and get the children excited and sharing data on picking up earthquakes from all around the world. You know, and these Raspberry Shake units, I mean, they only cost about $400. So in terms of an overall project development program, I thoroughly recommend doing that. But one thing I wanted to pick up here is even in this question, you know, you've said, and best practices to prevent seismic risk. You cannot prevent seismic risk, okay? There will always be induced seismic events. And I think one thing we've learned is do not be defensive about this, yeah? And just as we were talking about quarry blasts, you know, be on the offensive, be totally upfront and say, look, when we are developing the reservoir, we will cause induced seismic events. You know, there's nothing to be scared of. It's same as quarry blasts, it's the same as a train, much less than a train going past your house. You know, be proactive, not sort of try and say we can prevent seismic risk. We cannot, particularly with these deep geothermal projects. You know, drilling and developing a reservoir at 5 kilometers, you will induce seismicity, undoubtedly. And there's no point trying to get away from that. It is part of a project. The key thing is to make sure people understand that their houses are not going to fall down. Yeah, that an induced seismic event of magnitude 1, magnitude 2, you may hear it, it may alarm you, but it will not cause your house to fall down. And that's more the key message. Instead of trying to avoid the risk, is to say we will cause induced seismic events, okay? Yeah, but it is nothing to be alarmed about. And that's if there's any take home from what we've done, it is that. The more proactive we've been, the more we've said this is us. You know, that magnitude 1.2 was us. Immediately, people will take that. You know, what they won't take is saying, oh, you know, we can avoid it, we can do this, that, and the other. We need to be more upfront of an industry and just say this is part of the development process. It will happen, but you know, your real estate value will not decrease, which is what most people really worry about.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. I think you made 2 good points. One is to reinforce the education, not only in the school, but also in administrations, which sometimes are not very well informed about the what we are going to do in the geothermal project exploration, particularly in seismicity. And the second one would be maybe the seismic risk could be not the right wording, because if we know that the seismicity is going to occur while we are doing some operation, the question is how we can predict the behavior of seismic area in order to avoid any nuisance or any event that can cause damages or injuries in the population. So talking about seismic risk maybe is not the right word. Anyway, we reached the time, so we are at about noon. I would like to thank you very much, the panelists, and there are several questions that I'm trying to read in the screen, but I don't know if we have time to answer to this question. Anyway, I will pass the floor to Philippe, so he can manage how we can respond now, or if we can respond on writing later on.
Yes, thank you, Fausto. Thank you all panelists and presenters. Really interesting discussion. We have dozens of questions, quite technical. It will be maybe long to answer to all of them. So what we will do is like for last week, and we promise, and we did it, we will forward the questions to the different panelists, and we promise to come back to you via email. We have all your contact details because they are all interesting, and just to pick one and other ones will not be fair. So my suggestion is that we will forward all these questions to the different authors, just to see. Yeah, there's mentioned for specific geology, do we need to limit the depth of a drilling? Do we not expect to create too much overregulation? So there's a lot of questions that are really interesting, and maybe just to reply orally quickly will not be the right answer. So let's develop that properly in a written answer. So I thank you all.
Sorry.
Yes.
Can we also remember that there is the survey still online? So if before leaving the session, if the audience, if the people present here can click on the link and do the survey, that would be of great help for us, because up to now we have only 11 person answering, and we are so many. So if you just click on the link that you see on the chat before leaving the session, you can participate. It takes just 1 minute to complete the survey. Thank you.
No, you're perfectly right, Adele. And anyway, we will have some follow-up activities, including indeed this survey. The survey will still be alive. It will not end after this webinar. You will receive from us an email mentioning that the recording is available. We have received a lot of requests about having the presentation, so the recording will be available. Of course, it's really important to have you answering this survey. And maybe also to close, as you know, it's a series of webinars, so I really invite you next week, another technical topic, not on Tuesday, on Thursday, about water, how we deal with water quality. And on Tuesday, the topic is on social engagement, more non-technical, but also really interesting topic to deal with. And in 2 weeks, we'll come with a high policy event. So again, thank you all, and I wish you a good day. And I promise, and you can ask other ones who did the same, who asked the same thing last week or the week before, we will come back to all the questions raised. Thank you all, and have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.